Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. Who am I? My name is Natasha Kordus. I am a clinical psychologist and I work in a private practice here in Riverside, California. I got my undergraduate degree at California State University, Northridge, then went to Gallaudet University for my Ph.D. I grew up hearing. But in my 20s, I started to lose my hearing. I am now someone that identifies as hard of hearing, but it is a mild hearing loss. When I interact with hearing people, I usually get along just fine, depending on the environment, though. If it's a crowded environment, it's really hard to follow along, and it's hard for me to interact with other hearing people. I'm married to a deaf man. We've been married for 33 years. We have two kids. They're two twin boys. They're now 23. I used to work for the School for the Deaf in Fremont, then transferred to Riverside. I worked at the schools for a total of 23 years. I've worked at the Rochester Institute of Technology, Western Oregon University, and that was a total of 10 years of those places. And now I have the opportunity to work for Sacramento State University, where I teach one class. Really exciting. That gives you a sense of my experience and my journey throughout the years. I also identify as part of the LGBTQIA community. And that's a little bit about who I am. I've worked with many different members in the deaf community over many, many years, but especially within the communities that have members that identify as DeafPlus. This is a really special topic for me because I've had many opportunities to learn from that community. And I really feel blessed to have been able to learn so much. And I hope to share some of those lessons that I've learned with you all today. First, I want to set the stage for all of you to understand some important things related to this community. Now, DeafPlus clients are not just deaf, and they're not just developmentally disabled either. They're just going through life, trying to understand how to manage things. But then they have additional complications that they have to navigate as well. Sometimes they're struggling with language deprivation. Sometimes they're struggling with cultural differences. Sometimes they're struggling with autism. Sometimes they're struggling with frustrations and oppressions from the systems that they're living within. And I'll talk more about that more in depth in my presentation. But all of those dynamics impact their overall functionality in very complex ways. When we try to provide any type of behavioral intervention, we really need to consider all of those different dynamics and issues within this particularly individual. And it includes their language differences as well as their cultural differences. Next slide, please. Oh, I've already done that slide. Oops. Next one. Next one. I'm going to give you a moment to read this slide before I talk about it. So Bauman and Murray, they are deaf gain authors, the authors of the book Deaf Gain, Excuse the Interpreter. It's a great book that goes into the topic of autism. And it talks about how autism impacts the way hearing people view deaf people in a negative way, and how hearing people will assume that deaf people are not functioning the same level as them, that are less than normal. Autism talks about how deaf people are viewed as less intelligent, as not being on par with those using a spoken language, that deaf people need to be fixed, that they're abnormal. Autism can become a part of the system that we live within. And then that becomes problematic. Next slide, please. Oh. When we see deaf people as less than or deficient, and when we don't recognize deaf people as equals to their hearing counterparts, we're not giving them the opportunity to function in life. And we're not giving them the same opportunities to access things in life. Another problem that we see is the medicalization of deafness. This is important to analyze because when that happens, it basically means it's the framing of human differences in their experiences as a problem or is something that needs to be fixed or solved. They don't see deaf people as unique, as different, wholly, as just different humans navigating life. I was actually reading an article one time that said, did you know that deaf folk have a genetic component within them? It's within their genes that, excuse me, deafness is part of our gene pool and has been for years and years. And it's not disappearing. And why is that? Did you know that if something is really a problem in our gene pool, then nature will take care of it itself on its own? But deafness hasn't been eliminated. So I feel that means deafness is needed. Deafness is contributing to society overall. And I could cite many, many things that the deaf community has contributed to the hearing world. Read the book Deaf Gain, and you can see that the deaf world has contributed in a vital way to the hearing world. They've contributed so much, but I'm going off topic. Anyway, so the medicalization perspective is one that deaf people need to be fixed, that deafness needs to be cured. And that perspective of just the hearing aspect of the identity is the part that needs to be fixed, that needs to be cured. They're focusing just on whether or not they can hear and how they could perhaps aid that hearing, whether it's with a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, or how they can actually fix that hearing piece inside the ear to make them normal. We see the results of that as being that some members of the community will also themselves become hyperfixated on the medical view. Their identity then becomes part of whether or not they can hear, being able to speak, being able to navigate a hearing world by lip reading, by trying to follow along with verbal speech, you know, and not look like that individual is deaf and not look like that person is a part of the signing world and the signing community. It's heartbreaking. The oppression of the cultural linguistic need for identity is, is, is touching. So part of the reason why I am expanding on some of these concepts is because I want you all to keep this in mind, because these are important concepts when we're discussing this topic. And it will come up more when I'm talking about behavior later in my presentation. The last important concept that I want to talk about is the pathologization of deafness. Excuse the interpreter. And what that means is that when we're looking at deafness as a disease, or worse, as a mental illness, that is the cultural view of a negative stigma of deafness. Let me give you an example. When you see behaviors of deaf people as being less than, that would be an example of this. When you see deaf behavior as being odd, not normal, why are deaf people doing that? For example, the typical deaf behavior of tapping someone on the shoulder. That can be misconstrued as like, oh, that's wrong. They shouldn't be touching. That's something that they shouldn't be doing. Or children when they're waving their hands to get their attention. Hearing people will react as it being a problem. Why are they doing that with their hands? What are they doing? It's not a problem. I've had teachers in the past who have developed behavior plans because the kid is verbalizing in class loudly, or maybe because they're waving their hand too much in class, or because they're tapping on the table. The teacher is not cluing in to the fact that these are cues in deaf culture, and they will then identify these behaviors as pathology without recognizing that there's a cultural difference at play, and not being able to approach the kid in that way of, oh, hearing people typically do this, deaf people typically do that. There's a difference. How do we navigate this in the classroom? Next slide, please. Oh, can you go back one more? Thank you. Right here. I wanted to give you an opportunity to read this slide before I talk about it. When we develop interventions, it's important to recognize cultural differences, to recognize that we actually, I mean, if we educate ourselves and if we know what typical behavior looks like, we can then develop healing strategies. We can provide a lot of access to resources. Next slide. So Campbell wrote a great book in Contours of Ableism, and he talks about the tyranny of normalcy. And Campbell talks about how we have a mindset about what normal is. And that everything should compare to that belief and that idea and that concept of what normal is. The funny thing is that I'm a psychologist. So I recognize that, yes, there is a standard for what is expected to be, quote unquote, normal. But there's nuances to what normal means. There's an art to really being able to understand and identify a client's behaviors and to be able to respect their culture, their background, their upbringing, their lived experiences, what it is that they uniquely bring to the picture. That all helps them function well in life. And it's not, we shouldn't minimize their experience. We shouldn't stigmatize their the way that they are, the way that they identify. Next slide. So all of these concepts that I've thrown out there, I want you to just hold onto those, file those away for later. And I want to now talk about behavior. All behavior is communication. Now, often I've seen errors when it comes to other behavior specialists or psychologists who are trying to do good work, but they will say with a deaf child or a deaf person, they'll say that their underlying issue comes back to a lack of language skills. And that's it. I'm here to say that no, it's not just the lack of language skills that's contributing to certain behaviors. Next slide. I feel like it's much more complicated than that. We need to recognize that all behavior is communication. And we should not reduce the cause of these behaviors to just being a lack of language skills and say, oh, the solution would just be to teach them more language or expose them to more language, or perhaps they don't have enough language, period. That's the issue. That's all. We've figured it out. Let's let them do their thing now. We know that because of the lack of language skills, that also has an impact on cognitive function, social skills, and emotional development. We also know that because of language deprivation, their behaviors will reflect their lived experience, their identity struggles, trauma that they've experienced in their past, as well as the overall experience of systematic barriers with autism, with ableism, with all of those concepts that I just recently explained in the beginning. Next slide. Next slide. So I really want to encourage people to reframe behaviors. First, instead of looking at behavior as only a deficit model, think of behavior as a way of communication. That person is trying to communicate something to someone. That person is trying to communicate a need or understanding or facts related to their feelings. They're trying to repair a situation, perhaps, or repair their interactions. Something is causing that communication attempt. They might be trying to communicate their stress levels, something as simple as that. Language deprivation also shapes a person's experiences, it shapes their behavior profile. We know from experience that many clients will have different levels of ability to express themselves. Some will be able to be more clear about what it is exactly that they need. They can tell you directly. Some will act agitated and they're not able to express exactly what their needs are. And those two individuals I just mentioned, their behavior profiles would be different. Again, part of their background related to trauma and what it is that they've experienced in their past will come into play. Many clients have experienced a lot of abuse, unfortunately. We know from research that many of our deaf clients have higher potential for abuse or molestation. And because of that, we can't assume that that is not part of what's happening in that moment when we're seeing behavior. Mental health is being expressed in their behavior. Anxiety, depression, PTSD, all of those things become a part of that overall picture of that person. And oftentimes, helping a client to address their symptoms will help them understand their symptoms is part of addressing that overall behavior expression. So again, it goes back to that idea of labeling the behavior and saying, oh, that's just language deprivation. That's what that is. And then not looking any further. That diagnosis is too simple. Our clients are very, very complex people. Many times, our clients experience a lot of language neglect. So their behavior is adaptive sometimes. And oftentimes, our clients will be experiencing frustrations their whole life. They're growing up in environments where they don't have enough access to language as a whole. So, how do these people express themselves? How do these individuals satisfy their needs with behavior? So these people are figuring out if I do this behavior, I get this result. If I do this particular other behavior, I will get this other result. So behavior is also adaptive. It's important to recognize that fact. And sometimes we, as providers, need to play detective in a way to figure out what is happening, what they're trying to get, what, based on their past history, could be actually going on. So that actually helps us to answer the question of what the behaviors are trying to express. Next slide.
Okay, so that's a bit about the background. And I hope that helps you to understand our clients. From my perspective, our clients, like I said, are very complex. They bring a rich, dynamic history of trauma and cultural difference and a lot of various lived experiences and a lot of linguistic experiences that are different.
And we need to understand what it is that we are looking at and looking at those differences and focusing on interventions that connect to them. I'm going to go through many, many different interventions and ideas to try and give you examples to just be able to give an idea of what is possible. Some of these you may already be familiar with. Some of these you may have heard about. Some of these may be completely new. Okay. Okay. So first of all, we know for our clients, we have interventions that are visual, that are visually accessible. For example, we have social rules. We have reminders that we use. We have the choice making boards that we can use, different tools like that. We have a way to teach emotional expression. And these kinds of tools will help a client see what is expected socially, what a schedule looks like visually. And it's important to have these tools available with English words, with signed versions, so that it's accessible. One thing I really want to dive into that I think is really important is called the zones of regulation. Oftentimes, I see clients that struggle with self-regulating their emotions. They struggle with being able to calm themselves or be able to express that I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm scared, different dynamics like that. One thing that I've seen in the literature is called the zones of regulation. And we use this concept in therapy often to teach children how to understand their emotions, to be able to identify that they feel upset or that they need to calm down or that they're angry and what their options are with those feelings, what they can do, how they can navigate those. So, for example, I may have a space in my office or set up in a classroom or in a group home that is green, and green means ready. Green is happy. So if I'm happy, that means that I can interact with people. Green means that we'll also have visual aids that have a banner that say HAPPY. Maybe the finger spelled letters HAPPY. Maybe you have signing videos with someone explaining what happy means and giving examples like I feel good when I'm happy, but in sign language, so you can really expand on the concepts as needed. Then you would have a blue area, and the blue area would be perhaps related to the feeling of being sad. And you would have a space for people to sit, maybe like with bean bags and blankets, or a nice couch to snuggle up in. And again, you have signs in that space that spell out the word SAD with a sad face, and maybe the sign sad with videos explaining the concept of sad so that you can reinforce all of it in these different ways. And it's really important to have staff who can sit with a client and explain every now and then and reinforce some of these concepts. What is this blue area for? It's for the sad area. Do you feel sad? If you do you want anything? Do you want, it's okay to sit in this couch. It's okay to take time. Now, keep in mind the color code is up to you, but you could keep it a little bit more uniform. So, for example, red typically goes with the emotion of anger. So, the red could be a space, let's say, outside, perhaps, out of the way, where people, are red and there's mad faces and you can sit and be mad and it's okay to calm down in that space and deal with your mad feelings. Feeling mad, and then maybe you also have a video that's explaining how that feeling of madness looks. I feel electricity running down my body. I feel tense. My stomach is in knots. And knowing that it will subside and explaining that in the video, and then explaining how all people experience madness and that it does eventually go away. You're not mad forever. And that helps to have that visual aid in sign language. And again, having staff there to reinforce the support in those emotive areas. Also, maybe having an area where a client can be silly, or a place where they can just chill, relax, not be sad, but chill. But again, setting up physical spaces with color coding will help teach emotional skills, emotional identity skills, and self-regulation skills. It also helps clients have examples of what these emotions mean and how these emotions subside eventually. They're not permanent states of being, and how humans ebb and flow and move between all these emotions. And it helps people kind of understand that they get through different emotions and they get to the other side. Many of our clients have difficulties with, again, self-regulating their emotions. And there are many skills that are taught with the zones of regulation concept. I think it's a really effective intervention to use. And we're going to go to the next slide. So this is another thing that's been very helpful with our clients, and that is practical adaptations for intervention. And that's a sensory room.
Many of our clients need prompts to be able to enter a space where they are relaxed and they have that experience of sensory input. They may utilize swings or cushions, mats on the floor. They can use bean bags or a sleeping bag that can zip up really tight around them so they can feel that pressure. It's like a body sock. You can order the body sock online where people can be inside of it and stretch their arms and their legs, and they get that physical feedback. The resistance to that stretching feels very good to them. There are different sensory inputs that they can utilize for physical touch or on the body, using pressure in terms of massage or different points on their arms. All of those can be very helpful. There are also different types of weighted animal plushies, like a stuffed animal. You can also order those online as well. They come in either 5, 10, or 15 pounds, and you can lay them on your chest. And so I have several in my office for clients to use, and they say that they feel very good and they're very calming. You can also use weighted blankets for clients to actually sleep with. So there are a variety of resources that can help people achieve that sense of calm through physical input. Using these sensory inputs, again, always with an ASL, either a video or a signed picture depicting an ASL sign, and then explaining what that tool is used for. If a client is under a certain amount of stress, they can sit in the swing or sit on one of the cushions with a weighted animal on their chest. Oftentimes, I tell the parents of my clients when I'm trying to explain the sensory needs and the reasoning behind it. Parents oftentimes don't understand the reasoning, and so they will ask me about that. So I'll explain that many of our clients have a sensory need that's really no different than anybody else. When I'm done with work, I don't stay in my work clothes for the rest of the evening. I go home, I take off all my jewelry, my shoes come off, I change my clothes into some comfortable clothes. Oftentimes I wear fuzzy socks, and I sit on my couch with a blanket and a cup of tea. So all of that routine is my sensory need and the input I'm looking for. It's no different than our clients needing to swing or using a weighted stuffed animal. Sometimes I ask my husband to scratch my back, and he hits just the right spot. That's no different than when our clients use massage on their arms and rub in certain spots. It really is no different. Autistic kids' needs are not out of the realm of the human experience. Their behaviors are not out of the realm of thinking. All of us have sensory needs. And when we really look at their behaviors, within the typical range of human experience, then we come to realize that it might be a little bit more sensory need than what we're used to, but it's not random or off the charts. Okay, next slide. So here I talk a bit about linguistic accessibility. Oftentimes, our clients will need different ways to understand the instructions given and various types of information. So it's important to take a step back and assess and really recognize their language production or usage. Our clients are not always fluent in American Sign Language. We need to take time and assess the various registers they may use. We need to recognize if their language production is more ASL structure or more English structure, if they use gestures or lip reading. They might use an AAC device. They might use some type of a picture communication device. There are many different types of accommodations that can fit their needs. When we stay tied to one approach, such as English, we truly limit our clients' ability to access information. We really need to evaluate each client individually and assess uniquely what is their language skill. And think about what is the best way for them to understand. Some clients simply don't understand what might be on a picture or a sign. So we need to give them instruction in a different way. And if they don't understand it, we'll see behaviors rise. So that's very important. Once we figure that out, we can provide as much as we can, utilizing both English and ASL, as well as pictures. And the whole gamut can be adapted or added to depending on the client's needs and skill base. It's also important to recognize that some clients need some type of a reward system. Once we start that, they start to pick up on the nuances in their environment. They may recognize that in one space, the instructions have a particular meaning, and the reward brings that home to help them understand. Let me expand a bit on this and give you an example. When we're talking about emotional regulation, we talked about the zones of regulation. So you might have a new client come in and they don't understand what's going on in the environment. So you will explain that to them in various registers. And over time, you can reward their understanding of the environment. And you would select rewards that benefit them. It could be stars or stickers. It could be praise, such as waving hands. And what is culturally appropriate praise for that particular client? Some clients might be very excited about stickers, or drawings, or one-on-one time, or particular foods, or time outside. So gathering all of those in a cumulative benefit, there can be a plethora of things that somebody could be excited about, but it's figuring out which reward is unique to that client that they will find exciting. And you'll use that to teach them about, for example, the zones of regulation. So as they get used to that process, they understand where they use their happiness and where they go for their feelings of anger or frustration, or if they're feeling pent up stress, they can go to a different space even. But we have to teach those skills. And we must be consistent with our reinforcement system, with the sign language cues that we use for each of the various zones of regulation. And when we are able to set up that environment, then we can make an impact on their behavior. That brings to mind another important point. We have the most impact on behaviors change when the environment changes. Oftentimes, behavior plans, well, I think that most behavior specialists have an innate knowledge that a behavior plan is intended to change the environment. And the idea that a teacher or a professional is supposed to adapt their reinforcement system or their activities to impact or shape the behavior of the child or adult, as the case may be. But unfortunately, what I often see in practice in results is that people think that it's the child or the adult who needs to change. That they are the ones that need to do all the work, adapting and changing. But really, that's the end result, not the impetus. The true work and the action starts with the professional. We are the chef, if you will, where we add the spices and the ingredients a little bit of this and a little bit of that, stirring it up, trying to make that exquisite dish. And the result is of that exquisite dish is our client. And we are empowered to do so. Okay, next slide. So these are some of the practical adaptations for intervention. You can see again on the slide here. We can use a traditional picture schedule, behavior charts, emotional thermometers, or emotional charts. And transitions are very important for our clients. Oftentimes, clients have difficulty predicting what is coming next, or have a difficult time ending or letting go of what they are currently doing. They're invested in that activity and enjoying themselves, and so they don't want to stop. They prefer that activity. Oftentimes, that's why they're so invested. I see that with my clients' behaviors. Sometimes folks will say, oh, my client does not want to stop this preferred activity to transition to a new activity. And so how we explain this transition will be very important. We need to tell them that this preferred activity is being done for a limited time. And we'll come back to it. You can do that again, possibly tomorrow or the next day. And accompany that with visual supports and the transition cues. For example, once breakfast is done, we're going to have breakfast tomorrow. Or you can explain that when playtime is over, we'll have playtime again tomorrow. So those are some examples of what I mean. Next slide. This is a list that summarizes the steps. So first, we need to identify the target skill. Sometimes that can be more complicated than you might think. We want to really narrowly define what that skill is. If your skill says, I just want them to behave, that's pretty general. Or I want them to be able to transition. That's too vague. The skills should be things like, I need them to make eye contact when we communicate, or improve on turn-taking skills. And if you say turn-taking skills, you need to define when exactly you expect that behavior to happen. So we can work on turn-taking skills But again, you need to define when you expect that to happen. Maybe say during a conversation, but not specify during a game time. I hope that's clear for you. And then subsequently, we've broken it down into analysis steps. For example, if we stay with the example of turn taking, we'll need to identify eye contact and maintain eye contact and then respond. So that might be a 3-step analysis of turn taking. Oh, fourth would be wait for a response. So watching and then giving a response and then waiting for the other person to respond. So that would be an example of a task analysis for turn taking.
Then you want to teach this process to the clients. You would explain to a client, hey, look at me. I'm going to teach you. Wait, look at me. I need your eye contact. How to take turns. Now, look look at me. Oh, you looked at me. Yay. Right? So every time you start that process for each step, you want to reinforce each of those task steps. And how you reinforce that could look different. Maybe you show excitement like, yay, you did, on your face or with your body, showing sign language applause, for example. We want to be able to reinforce that so we can either build a behavior we want or decrease a behavior we don't want. For the client, when they see excitement, that reinforces them to do something more. If you're looking at me when it's your turn to talk or it's my turn to respond, then I'm hopefully reinforcing that behavior with my excitement and my praise. And if something isn't quite happening, then you can say, hold on, it's my turn to respond. Okay, wait, look at me, keep looking, it's my turn. And then you would do the next step in that task analysis. Okay, it's your turn. What are you going to say? What are you going to say? So kind of prompting them and then applauding and giving them praise when they do it. And then the very last step saying, okay, give it back to me. It's my turn. And then giving praise when it happens. So that's one way of reinforcing those behaviors and the dynamic of turn taking. That is a way of modeling this skill. And then in step 4, it says to prime with an ASL visual script. You could develop a video or you could use cue cards to help in that interaction to teach those turn-taking skills. So I would sign and then you sign. Oh, and you sign, so I'm going to applaud you. And then let me respond. And you let me respond, so I'm going to praise you for that too. Right? So then you're able to reinforce each step in that overall skill development. With step 5, that's the real interaction where you're getting together with, let's say, another client who already has mastered that skill, or with a staff member who is willing to be patient and engage and help develop that skill and can give the appropriate level of excitement when the client responds as needed. So being able to reinforce each of those steps consistently. Later, as time goes by, you can then start to minimize some of those reinforcement techniques until you eventually take them away altogether because the behavior is being done on its own. Now, while you're reducing the reinforcement, at the same time, you're exposing that person to a variety of different scenarios so that they can practice their skill in a variety of different ways. That would be step 7 and 8. So that's how we teach different skills. And this is for every skill out there. It's applicable in all those different ways. So you can see how complicated this can get. For the skill of turn taking, for example, or for transitioning, or knowing when to ask for something when I'm stressed and I need to go to a sensory room. These are ways to build those skills. There's a variety of different things that you can apply this to. This task analysis allows us to teach and reinforce these skills over and over throughout time. And when you're able to teach individual skills to your client, the result is that you increase their coping skills. Clients also feel empowered to be able to self-regulate their emotions. And so that's good. All right, next slide. Okay, so this is a summary of how behavior is communication. You have a child who's deaf, hard of hearing, DeafPlus. Let's say things happen, something comes up. The child is puzzled, doesn't know what to do. The child then looks to the environment for cues as to what to do. When there's no communication, what do? They will try out different behaviors. And if my behavior fails, my attempt for attention fails. Wait, hey, can you edit this part? I'm sorry, I messed up. So this slide shows, oh, this slide shows how behavior is communication. So you have a child, deaf, hard of hearing, DeafPlus, however they identify. Let's say something happens, an event, a situation. The child is confused, doesn't know what to do, how to react. The child looks to the environment for cues. And if there's no communication access or there's language deprivation, then the child will behave in a certain way to test the environment. Now, if their behavior gets the result that they wanted, then that behavior is reinforced. That child realizes that that attempt for whatever need they were trying to meet was successful. Then that behavior will increase because they know it worked. Now, if the behavior does not get what the intended action was, then the behavior will probably stop happening. If the negative behaviors increase and there is no connection, there's no result, there's no meeting of that child's need, then that behavior will continue. So it's really important for professionals to understand that you may think a child who is being disruptive, throwing temper tantrums, acting out, being anxious, giving aggressive behaviors, and adults are coming over to that child, giving them attention, saying, "What are you doing? Stop, stop. What are you doing? Stop." Getting involved. Do you think that that child's not getting what they want? No. That behavior is actually getting what that child wants, which is attention from the adults in the room. Maybe that was exactly what that child wanted in the moment, which was, again, the attention of the adults. Or maybe they just needed a break from the activity that they were engaged in and they wanted an escape in that moment. And so they acted out and they got the attention. We don't know, but we have to dig a little bit more to be able to get to the root cause of that behavior, to know if that behavior has failed or it's worked and is being reinforced. All negative behavior, though, is not necessarily a failure because behavior is communication, period. Whether it's good behavior or quote unquote bad behavior, it's just a form of communication. Okay, next slide. Okay, so we are talking about the functional behavior assessment next and the process that that entails. All right, so these are designed to identify the functional, excuse me, interpreter. These are designed to identify the function of the behavior. So why is the behavior happening? This assessment will help you identify that. Now, from this perspective, there are 4 reasons why, always, that a behavior is happening. 1, escape. 2, attention. 3, access to something. Or 4, sensory self-regulation. Now, remember, I mentioned a lot in the beginning of my presentation about the zones of regulation. And I talked a lot about sensory space. And the reason for that is because sensory regulation is often one of the causes for behavioral outbursts. I'm laughing because often it's the cause for many of our behaviors, for being honest. As you know, most people will lose it because they're either tired or they're hungry or they're just cranky or they maybe have had a bad day at work or they had an argument with someone they care about perhaps and they're just feeling out of sorts. And so then that affects their behavior. They walk a certain way, they carry themselves a certain way. Now, imagine if you had a space in your home where you could just sit down, let it all go, calm your nervous system. How would that feel? everyone would feel so much better if they had that. So sensory needs are universal. They really are. That's just my 2 cents, my little perspective for the day. Anyway, so again, those four causes are typically within the four causes stated within the assessment. And these are the standards that you are used within an FBA, a functional behavior assessment. And this will be used in different interviews, as a way to collect data. One thing that's really important to recognize is that a lot of the tools that are used for collecting information for FBAs are not designed for deaf people. So I'm often asked a question about language skills, or some of the questions we'll be asking parents about, or just the way that the questions are phrased. Does this child yell? Does this child speak? Can this child answer the phone? I'm trying to think of other examples. There are different ways that they ask these questions that are clearly based on spoken language or English proficiency. So we have to take that into consideration when we are interpreting the data for deaf children that are being assessed. And we have to inform parents that the assessment is based on hearing children, and that when I'm making my interpretations of the results, I will take that fact into consideration, and that they don't need to be worried about that. There is actually no tool, no norms, excuse the interpreter, there are no tools normed on deaf kids currently. So as an ASL professional, we need to always be taking that into consideration when we're doing our assessment. We always have to broaden the communication options. So instead of thinking about English only, we think about signs and gestures and pointing and gaze and other potential communication acts. When we go to collect the data and we are observing the clients, especially when it comes to DeafPlus clients, we can't just expect them to be able to respond verbally, confidently, express what they're feeling, talk about what they're feeling, identify all of that. Instead, there's going to be a wide range of ability to respond. And we have to see how that client, how their effectiveness functions within their particular skill set. That is a really important aspect to consider, because then we're able to match your intervention to their skill set in that area of what they are able to do. And then you can develop interventions within that particular area of need for that particular person, and hopefully build on their strengths and help them to really improve those areas of need. Another thing I want to mention is that I often see, unfortunately, many of our Deaf Plus clients will be in situations where they're the only deaf client within a group home, for example. And I want to know, I want them to know that there are environments out there that can be sensitive to their needs as an ASL or signing person. And we can identify whether or not their behavior is an attempt to escape from, let's say, too much English in their environment or too much exposure, and they're feeling maybe overwhelmed because there's too much auditory stimulation. Maybe there's too much dependence upon their ability to hear, and so they're wearing their hearing aids, they're wearing their cochlear implants all the time. And the environment is expecting them to use their hearing as much as they can. So it's actually that the environment can access the individual instead of the individual having access to the environment. There is a way to balance that in a more effective way. For example, scheduling time, having information being visually friendly in the environment, analyzing an individual's auditory needs, teaching staff about auditory fatigue and what that can look like. Sometimes forcing a Deaf Plus person to wear their implant or their hearing aid all day is exhausting, and that can contribute to their behavioral outbursts. And sometimes hearing staff don't realize how exhausting it is on the brain to constantly be wearing your auditory devices. It's mentally draining. But of course, it really depends on the individual. People's experiences are all over the board, but it's important to be aware of it. Also, for Deaf Plus individuals who are alone within a hearing group home, we want to be able to teach the group home about deaf norms. For example, like I mentioned earlier, tapping someone on the shoulder, waving your hand to get someone's attention, banging on a table to get someone's attention. Some hearing people may feel really shocked by that behavior. They may interpret it as aggressive. Also, think about the flashing light as an attempt to get attention. That could be misinterpreted in different ways. But if we take the time to educate the group home and the members about deaf norms and how they may be behaving in that space, that may contribute to greater understanding and more empathy. Also, I kind of want to go back to the assessor in this process and how they are collecting the data for the functional behavioral assessment or the FBA. What's important to notice is that when we're assessing clients, some clients are wards of the state. That may mean that they have lived in a variety of different institutions within the state. So their language skills may be all over the board. It could be home signs, they could be regional signs that they're using, they could be using some slang signs, they may be just using gestures. So really trying to gauge their particular language expression and the way that they express themselves, excuse me, interpreter, is really important in being able to understand the way that they are behaving and to include that in that final report.
Okay, next slide. I want to make sure I capture everything before time runs out on us. All right, next. So when we're developing the FBA, it's also important to include the types of reinforcements that will be effective with this particular client. Oftentimes folks are very well intentioned and they want to say in spoken language, good job. But they don't realize that spoken language is not accessible to our deaf clients. So we want to teach providers how to show excitement on the eyes and make that eye contact, do a hand wave, and show great pride, being able to be expressive, show that you are proud of the work, and that all of that praise is person-centered and culturally affirming, including using deaf media, the use of sign language, videotapes, including all of those aspects is part of exposure and in giving information to that deaf client and what reinforces their sense of confidence and being proud and empowered in who they are. Using those things is part of what they see, what they can take advantage of. And that's better than just tokens, for example. Next slide. Oh my, okay. So I think that that's it. You see a beautiful picture of my hometown here. And I really appreciate having this opportunity. So thank you for everything. Next slide. If you'd like to reach out to me for more questions or anything, this is my contact information here. And I appreciate everything that comes with this opportunity. Bye for now.